question that seems to keep popping up in the comments on a lot of my videos recently is which version of Outrun 2 is the best, out of all the different versions that are available. Now, I did talk a little bit about the different versions of Outrun 2 that you can buy in my Outrun 30th anniversary tribute video that I made a couple of years ago. But as the question keeps coming up, I am going to go into a little bit more detail about it here, looking at the specific pros and cons of each version when compared to each other. And as it's now been about 2 years since my original Outrun video, things have moved on a little bit, so we'll also have a little talk about what's new in the world of Outrun 2. So with that then, let's get down to business and discuss which version of Outrun 2 is the best. Now, before we get properly stuck into this, we ought to just clear one thing up. Outrun 2 started off in life as a 2003 arcade title for the Sega Chihiro arcade board. There has only ever been one home port of Outrun 2, and that is the 2004 original Xbox port that is also called Outrun 2. When I'm talking about Outrun 2 ports plural, what I'm really doing is using it as an umbrella term that also includes the arcade upgrade of the game that came after it in 2004, Outrun 2 SP, and the home ports based on that game, Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast and Outrun Online Arcade. Each of these games brings a little something different to the table, and that's not even before we then start to consider the regional differences between the Western and Japanese versions of some of these games. The original arcade version of Outrun 2 featured 15 tracks based on a European theme. Outrun 2 SP featured these original 15 tracks, but also added in 15 brand new ones based on locations from North and South America. The SP stands for Special Tours, by the way. Both games ran on the Sega Chihiro board, an arcade machine that was based on the architecture of the original Xbox, with double the amount of RAM as the home system, allowing for more visually impressive games. Outrun 2 SP SDX was a further update to the game that was released in 2006, which ran on the new and improved Sega Lindeberg arcade hardware, allowing the graphics to be displayed at a higher resolution. The game featured large replica Ferrari cockpits which move and tilt with the on-screen action, and features a cooperative play mode where two players can sit next to each other in the same car and take turns driving with their own set of controls. Whereas the original Outrun 2 had been an Xbox exclusive, the home ports of Outrun 2 SP were multi-system, with the original Xbox, PS2, PSP and later PC receiving a version of the game called Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast that contained all the cars, music and courses from SP. I'm sure you can work out the release date yourself. The Xbox port of the original Outrun 2 added an extra 4 cars to the original roster of 8 Ferraris, and then Coast to Coast added an additional 3, taking the total number of Ferraris at your disposal up to 15. Coast to Coast also included special turbocharged Outrun versions of each of those 15 cars that were faster, harder to handle, and had pimped up bodywork and in some instances paint jobs too. Both games featured a load of additional challenge and mission modes to add to their longevity. Then, in 2009, the PS3 and Xbox 360 received a highly stripped down, digital only version of the game that contained only the 15 SP tracks, as well as a reduction in the number of cars back to 10 and a reduction in the amount of music available. This version of the game was known as Outrun Online Arcade. Despite being a highly stripped down version of the original Coast to Coast, the game did possess one major advantage over its previous generation console brethren, and that was the fact that you could play this game in HD. For me, going from playing the original Xbox versions of Outrun 2 and Coast to Coast in standard definition via a SCART cable to the HD loveliness of the PS3 version of Outrun Online Arcade, the difference in just how much sharper the game looked and how clear the graphics were was really quite amazing. So, in trying to make a decision about which version of the game is best, based on the fact that Coast to Coast has all the extra content and Outrun Online Arcade has the best visuals, you could be mistaken for thinking that the original Outrun 2 on the original Xbox sounds like it's the version that's got the least going for it, but you'd be wrong. The original Xbox version of the game has 2 unlockable bonus stages in it that aren't featured in either Coast to Coast or Outrun Online Arcade, that are based on the individual stages from the Sega Model 3 arcade racing classics Scud Race and Daytona USA 2. What made the inclusion of these stages so exciting back in the day is the fact that to this day neither Scud Race or Daytona USA 2 have ever received a home port. Both games are now playable using the emulator Supermodel in more or less arcade perfect form, but back in 2004 this was the closest you could get to experiencing these arcade classics at home, and in my opinion are still a major part of this game's appeal. Just to muddy the waters even further as to which version of Outrun 2 is the best, the bonus stages in the Japanese version of Outrun 2 had further cosmetic improvements to make them look even closer to the arcade games that they were originally based on. Another unlockable bonus in the Xbox version of Outrun 2 that doesn't feature in any of the other versions is the original 1986 version of the first Outrun game. Now, in this day and age of emulation, having an unlockable version of the first game might not be the most amazing selling point, but as a secret bonus in a 2004 game, that's pretty awesome. Now, as we've already mentioned, Outrun Online Arcade has got the best visuals out of all the home console ports of the modern Outruns. But how does Outrun 2 stack up next to Coast, and the different versions of Coast compared to each other? On the Xbox, both versions of the game run at 60 frames per second, support a 480p resolution, and are playable in widescreen 16:9. To my eye, on the Xbox, the visuals in Coast just look a tiny bit more grainy and jaggy compared to Outrun 2. I was always under the impression that due to memory constraints, the visuals were slightly downgraded in Coast, specifically affecting the anti-aliasing, owing to the fact that it contained a lot more content than Outrun 2. However, I've seen it suggested on an internet forum that owing to the fact that Coast was developed as a multi-platform title on both Xbox, PS2 and PSP, this may have led to the port being slightly graphically suboptimal. Now, I've never played the actual PS2 or PSP versions of Coast, so I can't really comment on how they compare visually to the Xbox version. But I can tell you that the PS2 version of the game matches the Xbox frame rate of 60 frames per second, but the PSP is only 30. The common consensus of what I've seen mentioned on the internet with regards to how it looks is that the PS2 version is an excellent looking port that just isn't quite as nice looking as the Xbox version. The PS2 and PSP versions of Coast are interconnectable, which means you can transfer your progress from one system to another, which is a nice touch if you want to play some Outrun on the go. One thing that's not so good about this though, is that certain features can only be unlocked in each version by linking the two systems, which seems to me like a pretty cynical ploy to get you to buy both versions. Although I've never played the actual PS2 version of Coast, I did track down an ISO of the Japanese version of the game to try on an emulator, because once again, players in Japan got a better version of the game. Over there, the PS2 version had its name changed back to Outrun 2 SP, and it was the only game of that generation of consoles to include force feedback support for racing wheels, something which was later rectified in the next generation console versions of Outrun Online Arcade. Something else that was different about the PS2 version of the game was that it included end-of-course animations that were present in the arcade version of Outrun 2 SP, but were mystifyingly absent from all the other versions of Coast.
Congratulations!
These missing animations also managed to make it into Outrun Online Arcade, despite it being a stripped down port of Coast to Coast.
Congratulations!
The Japanese PS2 version of Outrun 2 SP also featured some additional music that wasn't in any of the other games, and the connectivity between PSP was shelved, meaning that all the content was unlockable without having to link up to the handheld version. Now, in terms of content, Coast to Coast is the clear winner here out of Outrun 2 and Outrun Online Arcade, having the greatest amount of cars, music and stages. It also includes the option to play the Palm Beach stage from Outrun 2 at dusk, and the Sunny Beach stage from SP at night, in the game's time attack mode. There were also little animations that would occur during the transitions between levels that would vary depending on how well you did in the stage you'd just cleared. Coast to Coast also featured an option to play the original Outrun 2 or the SP stages back to back in a 15-stage continuous marathon. Another nice touch in Coast to Coast was that in the Outrun mission mode, courses from Outrun 2 and SP would get interspersed with each other, which in my opinion helped the two games seem like more of a cohesive whole. Something we've not talked about yet is how the different versions of the game play. Whilst the basic gameplay mechanics in terms of how the cars control and drift are the same across Outrun 2, Coast to Coast and Outrun Online Arcade, there are some subtle differences. To me, Outrun 2 feels noticeably harder than both Coast to Coast and Online Arcade, with the hard level cars like the F40 and the 512BB requiring more skill to use and not fly off the course when you're drifting. Collisions are also punished far more severely in Outrun 2, with the player losing a lot of speed if you drift into traffic or a CPU opponent. Coast to Coast by comparison seems to allow you to pretty much plough through other cars, trucks and buses with only minimal speed loss. It also has a drafting function allowing you to slipstream behind traffic and your opponents, allowing you to push your car beyond its top speed, allowing you to reach the end of course goals faster in Coast to Coast than you would be able to in Outrun 2. As we've already mentioned, Outrun Online Arcade featured force feedback support for racing wheels, a feature that was missing in all the other versions of the game we've been talking about, apart from the Japanese PS2 version of Outrun 2 SP. However, when it comes to controlling the game with a pad, and again I can't really include the PS2 or PSP versions in my comparisons here, the Xbox version has got the other versions beat hands down in my opinion. The rumble in my PS3 pad when playing Outrun Online Arcade is practically non-existent. Seriously, it's so faint you can barely feel anything happening at all. By comparison, the rumble in the Xbox pad in both Outrun 2 and Coast to Coast is absolutely sublime, letting you feel every drift, gear change and bump in the road. The shape and position of the left and right triggers on the Xbox pad also feel far more intuitive to use as brake and gas than the shoulder buttons on a DualShock 3 in my opinion. So it's winner winner chicken dinner for the Xbox as far as I'm concerned here. Now something else I've not really talked about at all yet is the PC version of Coast to Coast, which came out a little while after the console versions. Being a PC game, it had the option of allowing you to choose what resolution you played the game in, meaning that this was a version of Coast to Coast that you could now play in HD, so surely with its HD resolution and the fact that it contained all the content from Coast to Coast, this must be the ultimate version of the game, right? Unfortunately, this was not the case. The PC version of Coast to Coast featured no rumble functionality whatsoever for joypads, and was not optimised at all for racing wheels. You could plug your wheel in and use it, but the game would treat it the same as a joypad, meaning there was a huge dead zone on your wheel's x-axis. Another rather epic failing of the PC version of Coast to Coast is the fact that it didn't include any bloom effects, the optical effect where light from a bright source, such as the sun, appears to leak into surrounding objects. We can see here that the PS3 is easily the best looking version of the game, with the sun on the legend stage bathing everything in a very nice looking orange glow. Whilst the bloom effect is 100% absent from the PC, it is present in the Xbox version, and you can see it working a little bit better on this stage. As it turned out, the bloom effects actually were in the PC version of Outrun Coast to Coast, but were contained in an incorrect folder when the game installed. By simply cutting and pasting a file called lensflareoffset.bin from the game's media folder into the game's common folder, it enabled the effects. You can see a before and after video here demonstrating it now working. The effect is still nowhere near as good as it is on my PS3 version of Outrun Online Arcade, but hey, it's better than nothing. Now just for shits and giggles, let's re-add the Xbox version of Coast to Coast and the PS3 version of Outrun Online Arcade back in there, just so that we can see them all running side by side together. Another thing just worth noting here is the fact that Outrun Online Arcade is the only version of the game that has got its HUD in the right aspect ratio. In both of the versions of Coast to Coast here, you can see that the speedometer, timer and score have been stretched out of shape. Something else interesting that's just worth mentioning is that there is actually another way of being able to play both Coast to Coast and Outrun 2 in HD, and that's by using the Xbox 360's backwards compatibility, which upscales both games to 720p. Playing the original Xbox version of Coast to Coast this way makes the game look a hell of a lot nicer than it did on my original Xbox, but it is still noticeably a bit more jaggy looking than the anti-alias loveliness of both the PC version of the game and my PS3 version of Outrun Online Arcade. I've never actually played the 360 version of Outrun Online Arcade, so I couldn't comment as to how that version looks and plays, but the emulated versions of both Coast to Coast and Outrun 2 handle and rumble just as well with the 360 pad as they do with an original Xbox pad. Whilst Outrun 2 similarly benefits from the upscaling magic of the 360, its frame rate seems to suffer a bit at times with some noticeable judder. There's also an issue where the transitions between stages don't quite happen properly, and you might find yourself driving through thin air for a short while. Now, although the PC version of Coast to Coast came with underwhelming handling options to start with, fortunately a member of the Build Your Own Arcade Controls forum took matters into his own hands. Howard Casto created a hack that added rumble to joypads, corrected the dead zone in racing wheels, and also added force feedback effects to the game. Awesome! The hack also allows you to swap out music in the game and change the appearance of parts of the in-game menus to appear more arcade-like, as well as lots of other stuff. Most of you, I'm sure, are probably familiar with it already, but I'll add a link to the video description for those who want to find out more. One last area of the different games I want to look at before I start drawing things to a close and making a decision about which version of the game I think is the best is multiplayer. None of the games offer the option for any single system split screen multiplayer mode, which is a shame, but back in the day they did all offer online multiplayer. I'm not sure if the PS2 offered any local link-up option, but I know a wireless link-up option was available for the PSP. Out of the PC and the Xbox, which are the two versions of local multi-system play I've tried, the Xbox offers the most stable link-up option, with either two Xboxes linked up via a system link cable, or more than two using a router. Interestingly, you can actually use a combination of original Xboxes and 360s, as I found out a while back. So in terms of stability and well-synced games, the Xbox version is the definite winner here, in both Coast to Coast and the original Outrun 2. In terms of practicality though, not so much. as owing to the nature of the system link, it means you have to have the systems close together, and if you're connecting more than 2 systems, you also need to be able to access your router and make sure it's in reach of a power socket. If you've got a permanent gaming setup in a man cave or your garage with multiple TVs and Xboxes permanently in place, that's probably not an issue. But if you're like me and space is a bit limited in your living arrangement, it's a bit of a hassle to keep having to move the systems and TVs around if I want to do any multiplayer. Yeah, I know, first world problems and all that. When it comes to multiplayer on the PC version of Coast to Coast, there is one area that version of the game definitely wins, and that's the fact that you can wirelessly link up multiple versions of the game. Although setting up the system link on Xbox isn't exactly taxing, on the PC it's even easier. As long as all the PCs are on the same home network, all you do is go to the multiplayer option, set one as master, and then use the others to join the game as slaves. There's no fucking around with IP addresses or VPNs or any of that malarkey. One area that definitely is not so good when it comes to the PC version is just how ridiculously temperamental the LAN function can be. Games will easily get desynced when you go through checkpoints, and the player's timers will start counting down at different speeds, leading to the odd situation where one player has a time over, but the others are able to still keep playing. The games can get desynced so badly that the other player will completely vanish and you're effectively playing 2 single-player games. Your opponent's car will also teleport all over the track, so one minute you think you're in the lead, and the next they've suddenly walked in front of you. It can make games interesting. I've also had the issue in PC System Link where the transition between stages malfunctions and one player will suddenly find themselves driving through thin air. This was also a behaviour that I unfortunately encountered quite a lot in the PS3 version of Outrun Online Arcade, in the few online races I managed to take part in, before all the activity on the server completely dried up. Other people on internet forums have confirmed for me that the strange behaviour of the PC LAN isn't just limited to games played wirelessly, and will still happen if the game is played on 2 or more PCs with a wired connection. So in my opinion, the Xbox is the definite winner in the multiplayer department. Okay, so let's start wrapping things up. Right at the start of the video, I'd mentioned that things had moved on a bit since I made my original Outrun 30th anniversary tribute video about 2 years ago. The first thing, which we've already talked about, was the discovery that the PC version of Coast to Coast did in fact have bloom effects all along. It was just that some bellend at Sega had put them in the wrong folder. The second is that the actual arcade Chihiro beta version of Outrun 2 is now booting as far as the title, car select and music screen in an original Xbox emulator called CXBXR. The third, which is the biggest of all, is that the arcade Sega Lindeberg version of Outrun 2 Special Tours Deluxe has been cracked and made playable on Windows PCs in an arcade loader called Technoparrot. Now I don't know anything about coding, but from what I understand, getting the game to run in Windows was quite a technical feat, as the game originally ran on a Linux-based PC arcade system, so hats off to Reva, the Technoparrot author who got it up and running in the first place. Now normally this would be the point that I'd cut away to some video of me playing it, doing some amazing power slides, and looking generally awesome. But sadly the cracked version is only playable in Windows 10, and being the Windows 7 caveman that I am, I've not been able to try it. From what I understand, from what I've read about the game running in Technoparrot, there have been a few technical issues for some users, with problems like the car's shadow not displaying properly, to later versions of Technoparrot breaking the game altogether. But from what I've seen of the game running on YouTube, it looks on a par with Outrun Online Arcade as far as the bloom effects go, but with the added bonus that you can play all of the original Outrun 2 tracks like this too, with Technoparrot supporting resolutions up to 4K. That announcement didn't sound epic enough, let's try that again.
It supports resolutions of 4K, motherfucker!
Yeah, that feels more like the sort of announcement that something like that deserves. I should probably also mention that the inclusion of the original Outrun 2 tracks in the arcade version of Outrun 2 Special Tours Deluxe is something that I've only recently become aware of, and at the time that I made my previous Outrun video, I was under the impression that the arcade game only featured the 15 SP stages. Also, I believe that the Technoparrot version of SP Deluxe supports force feedback and a network of 4 players, but don't quote me on that. So let's bring things to a conclusion here. We looked at the various pros and cons of the different games on the different systems, so which one is the best? This is where I normally give a cop-out answer when I get asked this in my YouTube comments. and say that I like them all the same. But let's make an actual firm decision today. The original Outrun 2 is the best looking version of the game on the 6th generation of consoles, and has got those awesome bonus stages not seen anywhere else, but it's missing the 15 SP stages. Outrun Online Arcade, being a 7th generation console game, is easily the best looking, but contains the least content. Coast to Coast is the most content packed, including music and cars not seen in any other version, but on the 6th generation consoles it's got slightly worse graphics. Despite that though, based on the sheer amount of content that's available in the game, I think for me, out of the individual versions of Outrun 2, Coast to Coast is the best. The PC version of Coast to Coast is the best looking, but was a half-assed port in the first place, and despite coming out after the console versions, it's still missing the end-of-goal animations from the arcade version of SP. So I'm going to stick my neck out here and say that the PC version is the best, but with the caveat that it has only become so due to the work of members of the gaming community who figured out how to fix the bloom and improve the controls. Without Howard's hack and the bloom, I'd have probably previously said, especially if you only ever intended to play the game with a joypad, that your best bet would have been to play the original Xbox version of Coast to Coast on an Xbox 360, so that you'd be getting the best of both worlds in terms of rumble functions in your joypad, bloom in the game, and also upscaled HD graphics, which admittedly are still a little bit jaggier looking than the PC version of the game. But the practicalities are that for most people, the PC version is now going to be by far the easiest option. I hear that copies of the Xbox version of Coast to Coast are now considered to be getting rarer, which is being reflected in the price they're going for second hand, which makes me quite pleased I picked up 2 copies whilst it was still relatively inexpensive. Sega lost the Ferrari license quite some time ago, which means that all the official digital copies of the game are now no longer available. As a result, it's now no longer possible to buy Outrun Online Arcade or the downloadable PC version of Coast to Coast. Having said that though, it's relatively easy to find copies of the PC version online via other means, and whilst I don't want to seem like I'm actively promoting piracy, the fact of the matter is that the game is well over 12 years old now, and the chances of it ever seeing a release again are pretty much non-existent, what with all the Ferrari branding being so ingrained throughout the game. If you're a Windows 10 owning arcade purist, then obviously the Techno-Parrot version of Outrun 2 SP Deluxe is going to be the way to go for you, containing as it does all 30 tracks from both Outrun 2 and SP, better graphics and the end of stage animations that were only present in the PS2 game and online arcade. With its fixed controls and graphics though, I still think that the PC version of Coast to Coast is the way to go forward, as it not only includes the aforementioned extra cars and music that weren't in the arcade, but also all the mission modes and challenges that add to the longevity of the game and allow you to mix and match between the Outrun 2 and SP stages. If you're a mega Outrun fanboy like me, why not also pick yourself up a dirt cheap second-hand original Xbox to go with your PC version of Coast to Coast, soft mod it, and then obtain yourself a nice little copy of the Japanese version of Outrun 2 to play off the hard drive. That way you've got the best of both worlds. In an ideal world though, why couldn't Sega have just got their act together and released a version of Outrun 2 on the PC that contained everything? So there we go, the PC version of Outrun Coast to Coast is the best in my opinion, but you do need to fix a couple of things in order to get it that way. So what do you think then? Do you agree with my assessment, or do you think I'm talking out of my exhaust pipe? Let me know in the comments below. I'm going to wrap things up there, so as always, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the content here, don't forget to check out some of my other Sega related videos. I've been Mr. Thunderwing. Toodle pip.
Congratulations!